Some families seem to avoid staying trapped in debt for long periods, and it has nothing to do with luck or special advantages. It comes from a small, consistent habit they practice right before going to sleep. It's so simple that most people overlook it entirely, even though it has been quietly passed down through generations. Tonight, before you place your head on the pillow, you are going to understand what that habit is. And if you truly follow it with sincerity, it may begin to ease the pressure you've been carrying. But first, there is something you need to understand clearly. Financial struggle is never only about numbers on paper. It also affects how a person thinks, feels, and carries themselves into the night when everything becomes quiet. Debt is not just a financial obligation or a set of unpaid bills owed to institutions. It goes deeper than money on a statement. Within our tradition, it is understood that debt can create an inner heaviness that touches a person's emotional and spiritual state. When someone is unable to repay what they owe, it can disturb their sleep, weaken their sense of peace, and even affect the focus of their prayers. Classical teachings in the Talmud emphasize the seriousness of pressuring someone for repayment at the wrong moment, showing that financial matters carry moral weight as well. At the same time, the person in debt often carries something even more difficult than the obligation itself: shame, fear, and constant worry that quietly builds inside and makes everything feel harder. Many people live inside this cycle without fully realizing how deeply it affects them. You try to work hard and make responsible decisions, yet the financial pressure does not seem to improve. Each month repeats the same pattern. Expenses arrive, payments are due, and no matter how careful you are, the money seems to disappear too quickly. It can feel like everything slips through your hands, no matter how tightly you try to hold it. At night, your mind continues calculating, replaying numbers and deadlines, searching for a way to make things balance. Even simple things like answering unknown calls or checking your account can create a sudden wave of tension. And perhaps the hardest part is knowing you are not careless. You are trying your best, yet still feeling overwhelmed. Across generations of Jewish teaching, families have understood wealth and struggle in a broader way than just daily effort. It is often taught that financial experiences are influenced not only by what a person does during the day, but also by the state of mind they carry before sleep. Nighttime is seen as a moment when a person becomes more inwardly open, when thoughts settle and the emotional noise of the day softens. Because of this, certain psalms and prayers have traditionally been used as a way to bring calmness and alignment around financial anxiety. One of the most commonly referenced is Psalm 23, not as a shortcut or magic solution, but as a grounding practice that helps shift the mind away from fear and back toward trust and stability before rest. One practice often mentioned in this context involves intentionally engaging with Psalm 23 before going to sleep. In some traditions, this may include writing it down, reading it slowly, and reflecting on its meaning in a quiet, focused way before resting. The purpose is not instant change, but emotional and mental alignment. It is about calming the inner storm that financial pressure creates and replacing it with a steadier sense of trust. Instead of falling asleep in anxiety and overthinking, the intention is to enter rest in a more peaceful state of mind. What gives this practice meaning is not the words alone, but the sincerity behind them and the consistent choice to end the day with intention rather than fear. Let me share something I witnessed years ago about a woman named Rachel. She was a widow living in a small apartment in Brooklyn, raising 3 children after her husband passed away unexpectedly. Along with her grief, she discovered he had left behind significant medical debt that she had no idea existed, amounting to over $20,000. To support her family, she worked 2 jobs, but despite her constant effort, the situation only seemed to worsen over time. Interest kept adding up, and letters kept arriving. Every month felt like she was falling further behind, with no clear path forward and no relief in sight. One evening, completely exhausted and emotionally drained, Rachel went to her grandmother, who was nearly 90 years old. Sitting at the kitchen table, she broke down and said she could not continue living under this pressure. Her grandmother listened quietly, without interrupting. Then she stood up, took a piece of paper, and carefully wrote Psalm 23 in Hebrew. When she was done, she folded it and placed it under Rachel's pillow. She told her to read the psalm out loud 3 times each night before sleep, to speak honestly and directly in her own words as well, and to keep that paper with her while she rested until things began to shift. There was no complexity to it, only steady intention and faith behind the instruction. At first, Rachel felt unsure that something so simple could make any real difference. Still, she was exhausted enough to try. That very first night, nothing in her external situation changed, but her sleep was different. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't waking up in panic or lying awake consumed by fear. Over the following days, she continued the practice consistently, and gradually her nights became calmer and less filled with anxiety. Then, unexpectedly, something shifted outside of her emotional state as well. A friend reached out to her about a job opportunity she had never applied for, offering a position with significantly better pay than what she was earning at the time. She accepted it, and that moment marked the beginning of a very different direction in her life. In the 3rd week, something unexpected happened. Rachel received a letter from the hospital stating that her remaining balance had been significantly reduced through a financial assistance program she had never even heard of. What once felt overwhelming suddenly became manageable. Within 4 months, the entire debt was cleared. It wasn't because of sudden luck or a miracle lottery win. It was because new opportunities appeared. Barriers quietly shifted, and instead of constant fear, she began to experience a sense of openness where things could finally move forward. The pressure that once controlled her life started to lose its grip, and situations that once felt completely stuck began to change in ways she did not anticipate. Now, it's important to be very clear about something. This is not superstition. Within our tradition, there is a deep understanding that speech carries influence and intention carries direction. The belief is rooted in the idea that creation itself began through divine speech. In that sense, human words are never treated as meaningless sounds. When someone engages with Psalm 23, it is not viewed as passive reading or poetic reflection alone. It becomes a declaration of trust and alignment. Saying, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want," is not treated as a wishful thought, but as a conscious statement of reliance and stability. It shifts the inner narrative from lack toward provision, from fear toward steadiness, even before anything external changes. If this message is resonating with you, then the idea is that one small practice alone is not the full picture. It is part of a larger mindset and structured approach that has been discussed across generations in different forms of Jewish teaching. There are broader frameworks that focus on how thoughts, intention, and daily habits work together over time to shape financial direction and emotional stability. The suggestion here is not that one action solves everything instantly, but that consistent spiritual discipline plays a role in how a person experiences pressure and opportunity. For those who want to explore this deeper approach, it is often presented as a complete system rather than an isolated ritual. One teaching found in mystical writings like the Zohar describes sleep as a deeply significant state for the soul. It is believed that during sleep, a person's spiritual awareness becomes elevated and moves into a higher realm of reflection. In that state, the emotional and mental energy a person carries from the day does not simply disappear. Instead, it is thought to accompany the soul in a more refined form. This is why worry, fear, and despair before sleep are considered heavy burdens, while calm reflection and structured prayer are seen as ways of reshaping the inner experience that carries into rest and renewal. Based on this understanding, a nighttime practice is often described in simple, intentional steps. It begins with taking a clean sheet of paper, something untouched and free from previous writing. On it, Psalm 23 is written by hand rather than printed, emphasizing focus and presence in the act itself. As each word is written, it is spoken quietly, allowing attention to remain steady and deliberate. Once completed, the paper is folded carefully, often described as being folded 3 times to represent completeness and balance in symbolic interpretation. The paper is then placed beneath the pillow, directly connected to the space where rest takes place, and remains there through the night as a form of continued reflection. Before lying down, the psalm is read aloud 3 separate times. The first reading is slow and reflective, allowing the words to be fully absorbed. The second is more grounded and confident, focusing on stability and trust. The third is approached with a sense of gratitude, as though the message has already taken effect internally. The intention behind this repetition is not repetition for its own sake, but a gradual shift in focus away from anxiety and toward reassurance. Over time, the repeated engagement is meant to interrupt cycles of fear and replace them with a calmer internal state that influences how challenges are perceived. In this view, debt is not only a financial condition, but also a mental environment. It shapes how a person thinks when they wake up and how they feel when they go to sleep. Constant worry narrows perception, making it harder to notice possibilities or solutions. This practice is designed to interrupt that narrowing by redirecting attention towards stability and trust. When focus changes, emotional patterns begin to change as well. And with that shift, a person becomes more open to opportunities they might have previously overlooked. There is also a story shared within families that reflects this idea. An uncle who ran a small printing business experienced a severe downturn when the market shifted toward digital services. Over time, his income declined sharply until he was left with significant debt and mounting pressure from suppliers and payroll obligations. One evening, during a family discussion, he was encouraged to try this practice, even though he was skeptical and very practical in his thinking. With nothing left to rely on, he decided to follow it consistently each night. At first, nothing external changed, but internally, he noticed he was no longer waking up in panic. Gradually, his awareness shifted, and he began recognizing possibilities he had previously ignored. Eventually, former clients reconnected, and new collaborative opportunities appeared, marking the beginning of a slow but meaningful turnaround in his situation. Some families seem to find their way out of debt faster than others, not because of sudden luck, but because of what they quietly continue doing, even after the hardest days. In one situation, a debt that appeared completely settled later revealed a repayment arrangement the person had never been informed about. Within 8 months, everything was fully cleared and the business returned to stability. Even after that season ended, he continued placing a written Psalm 23 under his pillow for years. He explained that it wasn't about the money anymore, but about the reminder that he was never truly alone in the process. There is a teaching in Pirkei Avot, the Ethics of the Fathers, that asks, who is rich? The one who is satisfied with his portion. Satisfaction here is not giving up, but trusting that what is needed is already unfolding, even when it cannot yet be seen. In Kabbalistic thought, there is a concept called kelipot, described as spiritual coverings that form barriers around a person's flow of blessing. These are understood to develop when fear, guilt, and shame become dominant inner emotions, and financial pressure often intensifies all three at once. Worry about the future, regret over past choices, and shame about present circumstances can combine into a heavy internal state that clouds clarity. Within this framework, certain prayers and psalms are viewed as ways of loosening those layers. Psalm 23 is often emphasized because of its language of restoration and guidance. When it says, "He restores my soul," it is understood as reconnecting to the part of a person worn down by stress. When it speaks of a prepared table in the presence of opposition, it reframes provision as something present, even within difficulty, not only after it disappears. This approach does not remove responsibility or replace practical effort. Bills are still addressed, work is still done, and decisions still need to be made wisely. The difference lies in the internal position from which those actions come. Instead of operating from panic or scarcity, the mindset shifts toward steadiness and expectation. That change affects perception in subtle but real ways. Challenges remain visible, but they no longer dominate every thought or decision. As internal pressure decreases, people often find they think more clearly and respond with less emotional reaction. Communication improves, and new possibilities become easier to notice. The practice is not meant to avoid reality, but to approach it with a calmer and more focused state of mind. Within Jewish tradition, this practice is sometimes described as a segula, a time-honored spiritual method passed quietly through generations for moments of difficulty. It is not treated as superstition, but as a disciplined act of intention. The process involves writing Psalm 23 by hand on clean paper, reading it with attention, and placing it beneath the pillow as a symbolic connection to the mind's rest state. The repetition before sleep is meant to settle the words deeply into awareness. More than the physical act itself, the focus is on identity and trust, reminding oneself that current lack does not define a person's entire story. In the stillness of night, when external noise fades, this becomes a way of shaping the final thoughts before rest, which in turn influences the tone of the following day. In another example, a young couple carrying over $100,000 in student debt found their relationship increasingly strained under constant financial pressure. Conversations about money often turned into arguments, and the stress began affecting their emotional connection. They were encouraged to practice the psalm together each night, reading it aloud before sleep as a shared moment rather than a private struggle. Within a short time, the intensity of conflict began to decrease, not because their debt had disappeared, but because it no longer dominated every interaction. Over the following months, unexpected financial adjustments and opportunities appeared, helping reduce their burden in ways they did not anticipate. More importantly, Their focus shifted from fear to cooperation, changing how they face challenges together. From this perspective, financial struggle is often compared to a form of inner confinement, where fear becomes the dominant influence on thought and behavior. The story of liberation in Exodus is frequently used as a symbolic parallel, where freedom begins not only with external change, but with an internal shift away from despair. Debt, in this sense, becomes more than a numerical problem. It becomes a mental condition shaped by expectation and emotion. The practice of prayer and declaration is seen as a way of breaking agreement with that internal state and replacing it with anticipation of change. Many accounts within communities describe moments where individuals experienced unexpected openings or solutions that did not seem predictable, reinforcing the belief that inner alignment can precede outward transformation. The practice for the night is simple but intentional. A spoken declaration before sleep that directs attention away from fear and toward trust. The emphasis is not on emotional intensity, but on clarity of thought and identity. Speaking the words aloud reinforces focus and creates a more settled internal state as the day ends. It is not about ignoring real responsibilities or pretending difficulties do not exist, but about refusing to let them dominate the final moment of awareness before rest. In this way, nighttime becomes a space of mental reset rather than repetitive worry. The invitation is to end the day with a grounded sense of trust and direction, allowing that inner state to influence how the next day is experienced and the decisions that follow. His provision does not run dry, and the same power that once parted the Red Sea is still able to make a way through what feels impossible in your financial situation. But this is not something meant to be observed from a distance. It requires your participation. You are invited to take a simple step, write the psalm, place it under your pillow, and speak its words quietly as you enter the night. The intention is to meet the moment when everything is still and the mind is most open. This practice is meant to gently move you from anxiety into trust, from pressure into calm. The action itself is simple, but it carries weight because of the sincerity behind it. Tonight can become different from all the others if you choose to approach it with that level of presence and consistency. If this message is resonating with you, take a moment and write in the comments, "My debt is breaking tonight." This declaration is not about empty words, but about making a conscious choice to align your thoughts with change instead of fear. In many traditions, shared intention and agreement are seen as strengthening focus and inner resolve. When you speak it, you are reinforcing a mindset that looks toward possibility rather than limitation. If you know someone who feels overwhelmed by financial pressure, share this with them. Sometimes a single message reaches a person at the exact moment they need direction or hope. You may not realize it, but you could be the one who helps shift their perspective. As you move forward, hold on to steadiness and trust. May peace and provision be with you.